Making a video for our family for Christmas. We're going to have Papa and Mimi tell us a little bit about their lives and about a few of the special incidents in their lives. And first we want to just have you tell a little bit about your genealogy, just who your mother and fathers were.
Who do you want to start?
Go ahead.
You can start first, Mimi.
Oh, thank you. All right. My father was Wilford Farnsworth, and he comes from a long line of Latter-day Saints. They joined the church back in the early days of the church, crossed over to Nauvoo, from Nauvoo to Salt Lake with the pioneers, and were down in Mexico. Pioneered down in Mexico. My father was born in Fruitland, New Mexico, and my mother was born down in the colonies. My mother was Eleanor Romney. I was born in Fierro, New Mexico, because at the time of Pancho Villa, my parents were driven out of Mexico with the rest of the Americans, and my father went to work as a railroad on the railroad as a superintendent, and I was born then. Do you want to tell where you were
Oh,
born?
yes. Now we get to the important part of the year. I was born in Colonia du Blanc, Chihuahua, Mexico on February 22nd, 1910.
I'm much younger than that.
Yes, yes. I'm prettier. My dad was Nathan Cram Tenney. He's the son of Ammon M. Tenney, who was a great missionary in church history, missionary to the Indians. And in fact, Grandpa Tenney was a missionary when he was 15 years old. He went out as Jacob Hamlin's companion, and they took him because he could speak the Indian dialects. And so they were living in southern Utah, and he went out as a missionary when he was just 15. My great-grandfather was Nathan Cram Tenney, and the same name as my dad, and he was one of the early settlers in southern Utah, in Cedar City. He was later killed in St. John's, Arizona. Our families were living there because of polygamy. They had gone to St. John's, and from there they were getting ready to go to Mexico. And a fight developed in the town between a bunch of cowboys who came into town with too much to drink and some Mexicans who were celebrating one of their national holidays. And so they were shooting at each other, and my grandfather was trying to make peace. He was known and liked by both sides, and he was an elderly man. And he went from one group to the next, and he thought he about had it settled. And while he was walking from one place to another, he stepped around from behind a adobe wall and was shot. And no one knows who shot him.
Actually, our families knew each other many generations past. The Tenneys and the Farnsworths had a ranch together. Was it in St. John's?
Well, they were there at the same time.
And then they had a ranch. Had a ranch together down in Mexico. So they knew each other well. And when my father was on a mission, he was called on a mission when I was just a baby, and he baptized Lynn while he was on his mission.
It was a hard conversion.
He said that if he had known what would happen, he would have held him under a little longer.
That isn't quite what he said. He said, son, I baptized you, and you've certainly rewarded me 16 years later by marrying my daughter.
He's listening. You better be careful.
You gonna let me tell about my mother?
Oh, well,
Oh, yeah.
You talk so much.
My mother was Myrtle Payne. She was born in Aurora, Utah, which is down close to Glenwood. And my grandpa, Harry M. Payne, was bishop in Aurora at the time that mother was born. And they too went to Mexico. And that's where my mother and dad met. The Paynes joined the church in England. Edward Payne joined the church in England during the time of the saints were moving west, and they came over and went across the plains in a covered wagon. The Tenneys joined the church in Upper New York State. They came over in 1618. That's pretty early. And they came from Raleigh, England. And they lived 1 year at Salem, Massachusetts, and then they went further inland where they formed a town, established a town, and named it Raleigh, Raleigh, Massachusetts. And then they kind of scattered out in the east from there.
I didn't know he was going to tell so much, or I'd have told more about my ancestors.
You're welcome to. Go ahead.
No.
Go
You
ahead.
tell more.
No, go ahead.
And you correct me every time you say
All right. Don't forget, this is for posterity. So.
Oh yes, I have to be very careful how I say everything that I want to say. Would you like to know how we met?
Yes. Yes.
Well, I'll tell the truth about it. My roommate and I, we're going to Gila College in southern Arizona. In fact, this home right here was owned by President Harvey Taylor, who was the president of Gila College. And he later came up to Brigham Young and was the vice president here for a good many years. Anyway, we went to Gila College, and I was there as a sophomore, and she came out as a freshman. And that's where we got acquainted. One night, Harold Turley, my roommate, and I were talking, and we wanted to go to a chicken fry that we'd been invited to. And Harold says, "Why don't we go over and pick up the Farnsworth girls?" I says, "Great." He says, "You get a date with Bertha, and I'll take Maude." And I says, "That's great." So we went over, and Maude was out on the front porch, and she was reading the funny papers. And so we stayed and talked to her, and we talked, and I kept nudging Harold, and he never said anything.
At least 5 minutes.
He never said anything, and I thought, well, this kid's not going to ask her to go to a party. So finally I said, "Hey, how would you like to go over to, I forget where it was, we've been invited to a chicken fry. How would you like to go?" "Oh," she says, "I'd like to go." And Harold says, "Hey, what's going on?" I says, "Go in the house and get Bertha, and we'll go." Well, he went in the house, and Bertha couldn't go. So Maude and I went to the party by ourselves.
Well,
That was the first date I'd had with him.
Well, then we happened to go out to Gila. It was interesting. This was during the Great Depression. And my father couldn't sell any of the crops. You know, we had plenty of crops, but they didn't have any money at all because he couldn't sell the crops. And so we weren't intending to go to school. And two of the professors from Gila came down, and they said they would really like to have Bertha and I come out to school. I thought ours was a nice family, and they'd like us to go, and that if we'd come out, they'd help us find work. So they drove us out in their car, and they asked me if I'd be secretary of the student body, and Betty was correcting papers, and English papers, and that's why she couldn't go that night, because she was correcting English papers. And it turned out well for Lynn and I, because he was editor of the yearbook, and our desks were side by side in the student body office. So we had an opportunity to get well acquainted.
Yeah, we sure did. She didn't take much baggage to bring their stuff out. Maude had one dress, and she used to wash it every night and wear it the next day. And I didn't know that until she told me several years later. I never told her that. That proves it's not too important to the man.
Neither Betty nor I had any experience washing clothes, and we starched those dresses until they were so stiff they just stand by themselves. But it was a lot of fun.
We had a lot of fun there in school. And when I graduated, Maude went back to the colonies. Tell them about what happened to you teaching.
Well, they asked me to teach the 5th and 6th grades. I had only had 1 year of college. I was very young. I was 17 when I got to school. And so the boys that I taught were much taller than me and heavier, farm kids. But I taught Wilford for one, and all of his roommates. And I must have been a terrible teacher. The discipline was awful. And I just really hated it. I remember one big old boy, Oscar Bluth, I told him to do something, and he says, "You make me." And he grabbed hold of his desk, like that. He said, "You make me." And I had a ruler, double-edged ruler in my hand, and I whacked him on the hand. I was trying to get him to go to the office And boy, he looked up at me and he left. And many years later, I went back to the colonies and I met him with one of his boyfriends, and the boyfriend said, "You mean this was the teacher that was so tough on you?" But that was a great experience, teaching when I was so ill prepared to do it. But anyway, I taught for 1 year, and then they wanted me to, and then I worked in a cheese factory, my father's cheese factory, and so forth. They wanted me to sign up for another year. But I had thought Lynn was coming back and we were going to get married. So I wrote him a note. I said, "I have to sign this contract. Let me know what's happening." You know. Now you can go on.
Are we going to get married or not? So, well, that summer, while she went back home, I got a job. One of those, boy, jobs were scarce. Lester Skousen and I heard about a job on a sawmill in northern Arizona, and we had to get to Phoenix. So we got a freight train out of Thatcher, and we got over to Wilcox. There must have been, in those days, hundreds of bums rode the freights, people looking for work. They stopped the train, and the bulls, they called them the bulls, they were the railroad police, came down each side of the train and made everybody get off, and they lined us up. There must have been 150 men there. And they come down and asked everybody where they were going. And they asked Skousen and I said, "Gee," I said, "we're just from over here at Safford, and we've got a job, and we're trying to get to Phoenix." Well, he says, "You guys go ahead and get on the train." So we're the only ones that they let get back on that train, and the rest of them, when the train pulled out, I looked down there and they still had them lined up. Wow. So anyway, we finally got up to this job, and we worked on a sawmill all summer, and we're sawing out timbers for the railroad. And at the end of the summer, just as we were getting ready to leave, Ralph Gardner, the guy we was working for, came in. He said, "I've got a sad story. We hadn't been paid a nickel." He said, "My creditors have attached all my lumber down there," and he said, "I've got a check here for $11 that I can give the two of you, and that's all I've got." So he gave us a note. He signed a note. We left. We had $11 between us, and we caught a freight train out of Holbrook, Arizona, and rode it into Gallup. And by the time we got to Gallup, I was almost frozen stiff. And we finally got back down to El Paso, where I started working for my Uncle George on the farm. And I worked there for a good many months. Worked there for a long time. Odie McDonald and I ran the little dairy he had. And then he helped us buy a service station in Anthony. And we ran that service station for a while. And then when the NRA came in, it opened up a lot of jobs, and a friend of mine from El Paso, Trinio Powley, offered me a job in the Powley Rubber Company. And that's about the time I got this letter from Maude. The funny thing is, when I went, she told me once, she says, "I'm not going to marry you till you save $1,000. And so I worked around. Of course, I didn't have much. And I went on that old Noroeste train, which was mostly boxcars and 2 passenger cars down to Colonia Dublin to see her. And she met me at the train, and she was so happy to see me, and I was happy to see her. And she says, "Well, did you save any money?" I says, "Yeah." She says, "Did you save $1,000? I said, "No, not quite." She says, "How much did you save?" I said, $14. She said, "That's enough." While he was working there at Powley Rubber Company and all of this, he bought my engagement ring, you know. I was romantic, and I had envisioned him giving me this ring on his knees in the moonlight. He sent it down by my brother-in-law, Tony. Yeah, Tony Bentley took my engagement ring back here.
And I was so aggravated at him for being so unromantic that I wouldn't wear it. I just put it on a chain word around my neck there until he had time to come out by himself, put it on by himself. But he did pay for it $1 at a time.
Oh, yeah, that's the reason I didn't have money when we got married. I've been paying for that wedding, that ring. But
Do you want to know about our wedding?
Yes.
yeah, tell her about the wedding.
Well, let's see, Lynn came down in an old Ford. Uncle George lent him a Ford, brought his mother.
Model 8.
And
I was only 2 years old. Not too long.
okay,
Go ahead.
2-year-old Ford. First to get married, we had to go up to the station and get married by the Presidente. So we went up there, and it was about a 2-hour ceremony, all in Spanish, and we hardly knew what was going on. Then we went down home, and I wanted a home wedding.
Talk a little louder.
I wanted a home wedding, so I was all ready to, goodness, I should have told him about going out after my wedding dress. That was interesting.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, tell
Come
them.
back. All right. In order to get any clothes, we had to go out to El Paso, which was about a 12-hour trip, and crossing over the line was quite a headache. You know, they'd take all the new clothes away from us. So,
Or charge you a high duty.
we charged high duty. Anyway, my father took the whole family out. When we went out, everybody had to have everything done. We had to have everybody's teeth worked on, everybody's tonsils taken out, everybody bought shoes for the year, and you know, everything. So as we went out, my little sister, Edie, just as we got to the line, developed a big rash all over her face, and it was sick. And so our mama said, well, she said, you just lie down here, and maybe they won't see it. So we crossed over the line, and Papa went to a hotel that was just a crummy little hotel. He didn't feel like we should take the whole bunch to a second-class hotel, but down to Rudy's Rooms, he went in to take a room. And I was so embarrassed at going into that crummy place. I was stomping around and crying, and I didn't want Lynn to see me living in such a place. And so Papa said, well, I guess I better go over to the Grand and get a better place. He said, you stay here, and I'll go over and see what they have. So on the way, he met Lynn, and he brought him back, and he brought him into the room. He said, well, look who I found. He came to help us move. There we were, dirty and sick and tired, and I was crying, and here he brought Lynn in to help us move. Anyway, I bought what I thought was a beautiful dress for $14, and it was organza, very sheer organza, and Lucille bought her graduation dress. So when we got ready to go back over the line, my father was insisting that we put those on to wear them across the line so they would charge studio. It's a long way. And this was the only time I saw my mother speak up. She said, no, Wilfred, they don't have to put on those dresses to cross the line. So we didn't have to, but I still remember how insistent he was. I put on my wedding dress to go over that dirty line. Anyway, when we got married, I put on this dress. Harold Turley was your best man, and he was upstairs. We were upstairs waiting. Bishop Call was down there waiting for us to come down the stairs, and Lynn was standing by the window waiting for me to come down the stairs, and Papa insisted on trying to get him to sit down. He kept bringing
I was waiting for the bride to come down. He come bringing a chair over for me. He wanted to make me comfortable. He didn't want me to go out that back door.
Poor old Bishop Call, when I got down there, he was so nervous. He'd only been bishop 40 years. He was so nervous that he could hardly get through the ceremony. But we were finally married. And that night, my mother had arranged a big party, big dance, with lots of food, and we had a wonderful time.
At church.
They had a wonderful time, but afterwards the kids wanted to shivaree us. And so we had gotten home and gotten up in our bedroom, and here came the whole gang to shivaree us.
What is chivalry?
A shivaree, you'll find out.
They separate the bride and groom for the night.
All right.
Anyway, they were trying to get into our room, and we had it locked. And my little brother, Wilfred, let them in the front door, and they climbed up on the roof and were coming through the window of our bedroom. And Lynn picked up a chair, and he was going to hit him over the head with the chair. And I said, these are my friends. Don't do that. I said, I'll never speak to you again if you do that.
I'm gonna be married, she never speaks to me again, it's gonna be a very strange marriage, so.
So he put down the chair.
Well, I think she wanted to be chivalry, that's it.
No, well, I just didn't want to have, I didn't want them to think I married a bad sport.
That's it. So, if they kill you, be a good sport about it.
Well, they took Lynn out on the flats to the lake, which was about 10 miles out. And it was dark, you know, no roads or anything. And they said, well, should we take your shoes or your pants?
They took me out in a pickup truck.
He said, well, if I have to walk home, take my pants, but leave me my shoes. They said, well, you're a good sport. We'll leave you. We won't take your pants. But they left him out there to walk home. And my girlfriends took me down to have a slumber party with them down at Uncle Jess's. And so about breakfast time, I came home, and here came Lynn trudging in just as it got light. This was our wedding night. Now, he was a little bit afraid to go on a honeymoon by himself. So he had invited a young married couple that's been married a year to go with him.
There were bears up in that country road.
You know what a camper he is, how he loves to camp. Well, this was our honeymoon. We drove up to Garcia, and there his brother led the way on a horse to a place called Devil's Hole. There was no track, we just bounced through the mountain. Then he left us there, and we gathered some pine branches and pine cones, no, branches.
Needles.
Needles, and made our beds. And then Lynn decided to go fishing. He's a great fisherman, you know. Yeah, he's fishing. Well, anyway, this was our first little argument. He caught a fish, and he brought it home. He said, oh, he says, here's our supper.
I said, clean it, I'll build a fire.
Clean it, I'll build. I said, what? You want me to clean that thing? I said, my mother never cleaned a fish. That's what the men do when we go camping. He said, well, my mother always cleaned the fish. Nobody cleaned the fish. And the young couple that came up with us they had a fight, and so he went up the mountain to sleep and left Eva with that.
He took one quilt and marched off up to where there was a little pen and made his bed there because he was mad at Eva. But it got real cold in the night, and we heard him sneak back.
Well, one thing that we did get up there was the typhoid. We went, after we got to El Paso, I began to feel terribly sick. I had a high fever. We didn't know what was the matter. Till one night I fainted, and we finally called the doctor, and I had typhoid. And a week later, he came down as a typhoid. So both of us had this terrible disease, and both of our mothers came out to take care of us. Uncle George took us in, and they had 2 beds, and each of them had a cot at the foot of the bed. And, oh, bless their hearts, they worked so hard. And with typhoid, you have these terrible sweats, you know, and they'd have to change these sheets several times a day and scrub them out and everything. I don't think we appreciated it too much, but as much as we should have. I mean, you know, they were so wonderful. But after it was all over, it took us till about, July, August, September, October. It was about November when they finally released it. And our hair, you know, your hair falls out, so we shaved our heads, and we were skinny, just like scarecrows. And we got an apartment with the Stevens over their garage, and they told us that we could paint it if we wanted to. So we were so weak, but we got some pea green paint. I thought that might look good.
Brightest, wasn't pea green, brightest green in the world.
It was terrible. We painted that whole apartment in that pea green. I can't even look at it today without feeling sick. But after we had that painted, we were still there painting, and we decided that our future didn't look too bright. Of course, he hadn't been working now. We'd been sick for 3 or 4 months. So we decided to go back to Austin to school. Now you take on, okay?
Well, actually, at the time we were married, I was working for the Poly Rubber Company, making $14 a week. And we saved money on that, believe it or not. We saved a little money every week. Had a little account in the post office. Then we stayed there. We had our first Christmas in El Paso while we were working there. Then right after Christmas, we decided to go to Austin. And we traveled by travel bureau. That's like you go down to these travel bureaus, and they have cars going. Cars will stop and check in and say, "Do you have any passengers for Dallas, for example, or wherever they're going?" And I got a ride to Austin. I remember it cost me $7 from El Paso to Austin. And I got down there and found an apartment, registered in the law school, and started school. And then after I got settled, Maude came down. You came by Travel Bureau too, didn't you? That was a cheap way to go. That's all we could afford. Anyway, we went to school that semester, and the next year we were there, and I was working at Lockhart's Creamery, and Maude had 2 or 3 different jobs. She had a job in the education department of the state for a while. Then she got a pretty good job with Internal Revenue.
Actually, I didn't get a job till after our first baby was born. Our first baby, Maude, was born there, and she only lived a few hours. She was born a month early, and she just lived from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until about 2 o'clock in the morning. She was strong and beautiful. They just didn't put her in an incubator or anything. They didn't think anything was the matter with her.
Top power.
But anyway, there was not any church down there, and we didn't have any friends or family, so it was, just he and I, really. And he had made friends with the mortician, the little Jewish mortician, and this fellow told him that he'd take care, not to worry, he'd take care of all of the expenses. And he got a little plot in the cemetery and a little box to put the baby in.
Nice little casket.
For $50. And Lynn brought the baby up to the room, and we had a little service and named her Maude. And then Lynn took the baby out to the cemetery, and he and 2 missionaries. He and 2 missionaries had a little dedicatory service and buried her there.
Actually, that mortician used to come in. I'd fix him special chocolate malt that he liked, it real thick and so forth. And I got acquainted with him. He knew I was in school. It wasn't $50 when this was all over, and he furnished the casket and the limousine and the grave and everything. I said, "How much do I owe you?" And he gave me a bill for $20.
Just 20? Oh.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I still can't. I've thought often since, I wish I could find that guy and tell him how much I appreciate that. Because we were flat broke, we didn't have anything. But we were there and then returned to...
Tell him about going to the show.
Oh, yeah. We were flat broke. Our rent was due. We were broke.
Didn't have any groceries.
Didn't have any groceries. Neither one of us were working. We had 50 cents. So we decided to go down to Farmer's Market, where you could buy a big sacks of produce, for 50 cents. And we had to walk right past a movie house where they were showing a movie that we had really been wanting to see. And we stopped and we looked at the billboards and we said, "Boy, we'd like to see that." So, well, we got to buy groceries. And Maude says, "Well, let's flip a coin. And if it comes heads, we'll buy groceries. And if it comes tails, we'll go to the show." I said, "Okay." So I flipped that 50 cents. And it came heads to buy groceries. And she looked at it and she says, "Flip it again." So we went to the show.
And after that, he got this job at Lockhart Creamery, and all we had to eat was when I'd go in there, he'd fix me a chicken salad sandwich and a milkshake.
we only made one kind of sandwich that was toasted. It was good.
Oh, delicious.
The chicken salad. We made that and then all kinds of balls and ice cream. About a little afternoon every day, I'd look up and there she'd be standing behind that hot plate with a big grin on her face, and I knew what she came for.
Did you ever get tired of chicken salad?
Oh, listen, when you're hungry, when you're starving, that's wonderful.
You know that old Texas saying, "The meat ain't tough when you're hungry."
It tasted wonderful to me.
Anyway, we stayed there and then moved. We ran out of money and ran out of job. And so we went back to El Paso.
Well, really, one of the reasons that we went back, I found that I was pregnant again, and I felt like if I could be home where I knew the doctors and everything, that maybe things would be better for us. And so I talked him into going back so I could be sure that everything was going to be all right this time.
Yeah. So I worked for Borden's Dairy on a milk route. Got up at midnight and worked till 12, 1 o'clock every day. Hard work. And I'd come by about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd get your grandmother out of bed, and she'd come out, and she was about 7, 8 months pregnant. And she'd sit on, yeah, with old Lynn, and she'd sit on that butter box, and boy, the way we'd go, we just jolted all over that part of town delivering the milk. And I always got through about 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was a donut shop right close to where we lived that opened about 4:30 or 5, and it had hot donuts. And we used to stop there. That was the end of the route. We'd stop there for hot donuts and a glass of milk, drink some of my milk, and eat hot donuts. That was a real treat. Anyway, just before it was time for the baby to come, I went back down to Austin trying to get back into school, trying to find a job. And I went down, spent 2 weeks, and I couldn't find a thing. So I got my travel bureau.
You just left Austin.
Yes, I came back by way of travel bureau, and the car broke down. They put you in old cars, you know. The car broke down, and we were out all night and all the next day, and I finally left them, and I caught a ride into El Paso, and I immediately called out to where Maude was staying. They said, well, she's gone to the hospital. This was January 25th. This is what, expecting Lindy. So I went out to the hospital, and
he walked in the back door, I walked in the front. And we went up to the delivery room together, to the waiting room. And the nurses put me to bed and left the room, and Papa fainted. And I jumped out of bed to see what was the matter, and the nurses came back in. What are you doing out of bed? I said, well, he's fainted, he's on the floor.
that just proves that having children is a lot harder on the man.
It was
Really
worth
tough.
it. Lindy was the most beautiful baby. Everyone would stop us and admire him. Oh, he was a beautiful baby.
He was cute.
He was so cute. And Lynn was so proud of him, he'd take him every place with him.
Yeah, I did. I took it when we later moved to Bisbee, and we lived way up in the canyon. Lived in the canyon. We lived on a house way up on the side of the hill, and I don't know how many steps it was down, but I had worked lots.
700.
Work either the night shift or the graveyard shift. I'd have practically all day around the house, and I'd pick that kid up and I'd walk all the steps all the way down into town, carry him around, walk around for a while, and then carry him back up.
The reason we were in Bisbee, Lynn heard that they paid better money over there, and we wanted to get back into school. And so he got this job with Phelps Dodge down in the mine. And they paid, what, $5 a day?
$4.40.
$4.40 a day?
That was big money in those days, but it was expensive to live over.
Oh, so we had a terrible time saving. We finally saved $100. And
Well, we paid for that old car too, the old Dodge.
that was $100 too. We had $100 and we paid $100 for an old car. We put everything that we had in the back seat of that car and took Lindy and started for Dallas because we had heard there was a night law school there that he might be able to get into. And that's why we went to Dallas in the first place.
I was working in this copper mine on the 2,200 foot level, 2,200 feet underground. We go down the shaft, you know. And I developed, I found out I was having, every night I'd come out there, I'd have the worst headache. I just couldn't see. My head would ache so badly. And found out I was allergic to dynamite. There's something in dynamite that a lot of people are allergic to, and it causes headaches. And my job, I was a mucker. That's the guy that does all the cleaning up and plugs the boulders and that sort of thing, and then go after we drill the holes. The mucker goes to the storeroom where they keep the dynamite and loads up the bags of dynamite and brings it back. So I had to handle that stuff. And I'd get it on my hand, and I'd wipe my face, and anyway, it was killing me. And I finally found out what it was. So I'd hold my breath as long as I could. I'd go in there, I'd take a big breath and run in there and load up part of my bag, come out, take a breath and go back.
Did really good.
But I still had to handle it. So that I was so glad to get out of there.
So we drove into Dallas when your dad was 1 year old.
Yeah.
Well, did they have a night law school there that you could
Don't
Well, yeah, they had one, but I never had.
we didn't get the money to get in.
Didn't have it. I was wondering half the time if I was going to be able to pay the rent. We'd pay our rent by the week, either $3 or $3.50 a week, something like that for rent for an apartment. And I had a hard time making that. I had 2 or 3 different jobs. I sold, I collected for a magazine company. They sell these magazines, like a gal buys a bunch of magazines and someone has to collect every month. Well, that's what I did. Then I sold real estate, except I never did make a sale.
It was about this time that I decided I better get a job, so it was so hard to find a job. I started downtown and I saw a line of people that went around 2 city blocks. And I just got in line, I didn't even know what it was. And I got in line. And when I got up there, I found out that they were opening a drugstore over on Lemon.
Skiller's.
Skiller's was opening a new drugstore. And they gave me a job as a
They
waitress.
wanted a waitress, yeah.
They were opening a
Well, she was
restaurant.
experienced.
I said, oh yes, I know how to wait on tables. I lasted only one night. Then they fired me because I didn't know enough to remove the service plate or something like that. But they felt sorry for me and gave me a job as a fountain girl in their drugstore over in Southland Life Building.
In downtown Dallas.
Downtown.
Remember the old Southland
Yeah.
Life building?
So I jerked sodas there for a while.
Finally, I was collecting from a guy who was in the insurance business. He says, "Hey man, you ought to be in the insurance business." He says, "You can do better than this." So he introduced me to his boss, and I went up and got a job with the National Life and Accident Insurance Company. That's when I first went in the insurance business. And a couple of years later, I took a job with Republic National and went to El Paso. And that's when I really.
Have you got enough?
That's when we moved to El Paso. We had Patsy. Patsy was born in Dallas. Had the 2 children, and well, I had to go to El Paso by myself. I was so broke, and I lived out there by myself for about 3 or 4 months. And Maude
6
was
months.
working. Maude was working at Yardley's. She had a pretty good job, you know, kind of like Kathy. She was doing good, and I got this. Anyway, I got to doing pretty good out there selling life insurance. In fact, I was leading the company. And so I went in to get her. And I had enough prestige with the company that they guaranteed my loan with an auto company there, and I went down and bought a brand new Plymouth. Boy, were we proud of that. $710 for a brand new Plymouth.
Well, Scott wants me to tell about something that happened while I was working for Yardley and Company.
Oh, does he? Okay.
Yes. I was working for this little English lady, of course, and she wanted me to go with her to this fortune teller. She said she was just wonderful, that people came from New York and Chicago and everywhere to have her tell her fortune. So I went out with her, and she didn't know a thing about me. She had never heard my name, never seen me or anything. And I went in there, and she was reading her tea leaves and so forth, and she told me such interesting things. Now, I remember at this time, Lynn was away, broke. I was sending him money to get by on. It was just, really a bad situation. And she said, I can see in your past somebody that was killed. I can see a swing going back and forth. I can't see what it is. Well, my sister Ruthie was killed by a swing when she was 8 years old. And she said, and then one of the things she told me, she said, your husband is far away in a city where people go to get well. Well, El Paso, that was at that time where people who had TB would go for their lungs.
Right, desert country.
Desert country. And she said, before the year is out, you'll have a new car and a new house, and you'll be living far away from here. And I just laughed. I thought this was ridiculous. It sounded so far-fetched. Well, it was about 2 months after that Lynn came for me in this new car. Okay.
But we still loaded everything we had in this world, everything we had.
Plus the 2 babies.
Plus the 2 babies, the trunk, and then between the seats, we'd build it up where the kids could sleep. We had everything we owned in that little old car, and away we went.
You couldn't move that.
From then on, it was from then on, it was really downhill all the way. We had we had some hard times. But we had fun, didn't we?
You bet.
We did. We didn't worry. We should have. If I do that again, I'd really worry. But we didn't worry. Like, you know, like one time we flipped whether we go to the shore or buy something to eat. We never have worried too much, and I guess that's. I'm glad of it. But I know that if I had to make some of the decisions now that I did then, it would drive me crazy. You know, and I wouldn't be able to sleep nights, knowing how little the financial insecurity we had back in the early days of our marriage. It was really bad.
Well, it was, while we were in El Paso, the World War II came along, and Texie and Susie were born there. But Lynn was 34, and we didn't think that he'd be drafted, but you know, because they just took them up to age 35. But he had an opportunity to go to Houston as manager of one of the offices there. So he went down to the draft board and he said, "Now, is there any danger if I move that you'll draft me?" And I said, "Oh no, go ahead." So we moved to Houston, and we'd been there about 2 weeks when he got a draft notice that he was to report to the Army. Left me and the 4 children there in Houston in this strange big city while he went off to war.
When I first got there, you know, they ship people out all over the world from that reception center to take their training, and they called me into the office, and they, after I'd taken my tests, they said, "We noticed that you speak Spanish." I said, "Yeah." They said, "How would you like to stay right here on the post and be a school teacher in our special training unit?" And I said, "Well, no, we'll call back." I said, "Well, I'd like that." So he said, "We want you to stay here and take your basic training, and then when your basic's over, we'll assign you down to the special training unit as a teacher." These students, they had 2 companies of Mexicans down there who could not speak English, and they had 1 company of Negroes who were illiterate. In fact, all of them were illiterate. And they'd keep them in this school until they could, at least where they could read and write and read road signs, that sort of thing. And so when I finished my basic, I found out that I was not assigned to the Mexican company. I was assigned to the black company, and I was not assigned as a school teacher. I was assigned as a drill field instructor. So what I did, these guys would go to school a half a day and drill a half a day. I'd have 1 group in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. So all the time I was in the service, I was a drill field instructor at the STU, which was known in that post as the Stupid Troops University.
He made it to the high rank of corporal.
Yeah, that was a funny. We had, actually, if I hadn't been away from my family, I had a lot of fun.
Well, besides, he got to come home real often because they'd send him after these prisoners these boys that went AWOL, and they'd always let him go after them.
Yeah, well, I had a real good in with a top sergeant there. I got to be a good friend of his. In fact, he called on your dad here a few years ago. And every time there was an opportunity to go to Houston, he'd let me go because he knew how much I wanted to see my family. So I'd go down there and pick up a prisoner and bring him back. One time I picked up a little Mexican guy and brought him in and took him to the officer of the day and turned him over to him. They have a little jail there and everything. And so he had to sign a release to show that I brought the prisoner in and left. And in about an hour, this officer called me and says, "That kid's gotten away." He says, "Someone left the back door open." So I got another trip. I got to go get him a second time.
Did he live in Houston?
Yeah, he lived in Houston.
This was where your dad, well, he started school in El Paso, but we moved there when he was in the 1st grade. And he was so tiny, but he insisted on riding with his great big bike to school. And he was too little to climb up on it, so he'd take that bike to school and get up on the curb to get on it and ride that big old bike. He was always such an independent Such an independent young man. He tried so hard with everything. But that's where he started school.
Yeah, he was a great kid. Then when we got out of the service, I was really, Maude worked at Southern Pacific
Demurrage clerk.
while I was in there. But anyway, finally we got out. The Red Cross took some action and got me a dependency discharge. And I got home, and right after that, my vice president, Alan Anderson, you never did know him, but your dad did. He invited me. He was the vice president and director of agencies for the company, and he invited me to come into Dallas as his assistant. And that's when we moved to Dallas, and we moved out on Briscoe, 109 South Briscoe. It's where we were living when your dad had his first date with your mother. Have we told you about that?
Go ahead, tell us again.
I'll tell you again, just for posterity. He was in junior high school, and those days the kids had dances in junior high school. I don't know if they still do or not, but he was too young to drive, but he had a date. And he said, "Dad, will you take us to the dance?" He says, "There's 3 of us want to go. That'd make 7 in the car." I said, "Sure, I'll take you." So we picked up the boy. I think the boys all came over to the house, and then we picked up the girls. I remember going by the Richter's place on Winnetka to pick Sally up. Sally was with Damon, and Lindy was with a girl named Linda who lived up not too far from us. Anyway, when we got home the next day, he says, "Hey, Dad," he says, "what'd you think of my date last night? What'd you think of Linda?" I said, "Oh, she's nice. But I tell you something,
Damon?
old Damon had the prettiest girl of the bunch." He said, "Oh," he said, "that's all. Well." Next time there was a dance coming up, he said, "Dad, will you take us to the dance tonight?" And I said, "Well, I guess so." He said, "Hey," he says, "you remember that girl that Damon had?" I says, "Yeah." He says, "That's Sally, and I got a date with her tonight."
From then on, it was Sally.
From then on, it was Sally. So I've told your mother that I'm the one that really picked her out.
Your dad,
She better treat me pretty nice.
your dad was really, he always, he felt so responsible. He got his paper route without us knowing he was going out for a job. He got his job as a package boy in that, what was the name of that store?
Yearwood.
No,
I thought it was Yearwood Groceries.
no.
It was A&P, wasn't it?
What?
No. No, they still have some.
Starts with a W.
No, they still have some. No, Yearwood's in El Paso. They still have some cafeterias there.
Wyatt.
Wyatt's.
Yeah. He got his job there without us knowing it, and he was so proud at Christmas time. They gave him a big ham for a present, and he brought home the ham for us to have for Christmas dinner. Oh, he was so cute. It was wonderful. You know, one of those, that was quite dangerous, though. One time he was coming home after dark, after he'd been working, and some boys came along in a car, and they stopped and they said, you know, "What's your name?" And he told them, and he thought they wanted to ask him where he was, you know, a direction or something. And they said to each other, "Do you know this kid?" And they said, "No." I said, "Okay, let's get him." And they got up and they beat him up really bad and left him lying there on the road. And when he came home, he made it home by himself, but he was just, you know, really frightened.
I'll tell you, he had a dad that was really upset. Yeah.
That was the most frightening thing that happened, I think. Turn it off a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's. I think we're probably getting to the end of what's real interesting to these 2 boys. I just want to say something, and I'm sure Maude will too, of how much we've enjoyed having you guys here in Provo, where we can see you occasionally and see your lovely wives. I think you both have terrific girls. Trey's got a terrific baby, and we're just happy to be a part of your lives, and we're thrilled every time you come to see us. It's just really great.
I have such tender memories of you when you were little, the tiny little boys when you were first born. I was with you then. with your mom.
Trey locked you in that room.
You don't want to put that on
I-
me.
No.
That must have been about the time Kendall was born.
But you've always been such a delight to us.
Yeah, good
We're
kids.
so proud of you.
Proud of your whole family. It's real, mother and dad,
The rest,
real great, and your brothers, real great people.
the rest of our life was really up as far as finances is concerned.
Yeah.
We had wonderful experiences while he was vice president and director of agencies of the different companies, and we got to travel and
Yeah,
stay in some of the most beautiful places in the world.
just tell about where you went in insurance, where you were the vice president of what companies?
Well, in Texas, I was hired by the California Western States Life Insurance Company. At that time, I was vice president and director of brokerage for Republic National Life, which was the company I first went with down there. And so I got a chat. I met these people from Cal Western, and I liked them, and they offered me a job as superintendent of agencies for the Southwest area. And I thought it was a good chance for advancement because the company I was with is owned by one man and controlled by one man, and it was very, anybody's going to make any money out of that company was going to be his family. So we decided to go with Cal Western, and it was a terrific experience. We just had a lot of fun, and after I'd been with them about 5 years, I guess, wasn't it?
Not that long.
As superintendent, maybe not that long, I
Couple
forgot. The guy immediately over me, who was vice president and manager of sales, developed lung cancer. And Bob Murphy came out to see me, and he told me that Dee wasn't going to live more than 6 months. That was a real shock to me because I liked Dee and enjoyed working with him. And he says, we want you to come into the home office as his assistant. He says, he doesn't know how bad off he is. He thinks that he's going to get well enough to come back to work, but he says, I know he won't. So I just we want you right now to come in as his assistant and let him know that you think that he's going to come back to work too, but he says, he really isn't. And he says, then when he passes away, we'll make you the vice president and manager of sales. So I went in, and I guess Dee lasted,
Very short time.
2 months. 2 months after I got in there, he was gone. It was really bad. This actually started in his spine, and he had such terrible pains in his spine, and they couldn't find out what was the matter. And by the time they found out what was the matter with him, the cancer had spread to his lungs.
He was a heavy smoker.
Heavy smoker. And a nervous guy. He'd light a cigarette and take 2 puffs and put it down. Sometimes he'd have 3 cigarettes lighted in different parts of the room while he'd be pacing up and down. But a real nice guy, and he did a lot for me. He was a good friend to me. But yeah, the job was, well, I used to tell your grandmother that if somebody paid my expenses, I'd do it for nothing because I really enjoyed it. I look forward to going to work every day. And we did. We had conventions all over Mexico City, Hawaii,
Every place.
a lot of luxurious places, beautiful suites. In Mexico City, we had a suite on top of the hotel. At the Del Prado Hotel is the same suite that President Roosevelt occupied when he was down there. So we had just a lot of good times.
Well, for years and years, we just really, really had a good time.
Yeah.
And he was nationally recognized. Tell him about your work on the national board.
Well, I was on the board of directors of the Life Insurance Agency Management Association, which does all the research for the selection of agents and the training of agents, the selection of managers and the training of managers. I was on on that board for 3 years, and then I was made chairman of the American Life Convention, which is a convention, association that about 80% of the insurance companies in America belong to. The first year I was That kind of come up. I was secretary, and then I was the vice chairman, and then chairman of the agency section, and in charge of the program the last year, the year I was president. We had both these organizations met in Chicago, and most of the meetings were at the Edgewater Beach Hotel, which was a fine hotel there on Lake Michigan, and we enjoyed it very much. It was a lot of fun.
Do you have any other questions or anything?
Who my favorite? Wed.
We want you to feel
Whoever I'm
like
with,
you're
my
the
favorite.
We just asked them who their favorite grandchildren were, but they wouldn't answer. not directly.
You can ask me one question where there'll be no problem. Who's my favorite great-grandchild?
That's right.
Oh, we have favorites there.
Tell us how disappointed you were with your first grandchild, though.
Oh, we came all the way from Sacramento to see that kid when he got here. We got pictures of him when he was a day old, I
You
guess.
disappointed?
We were proud.
You know how round his head was when he was little?
It's about time to wrap this up.
Getting too personal.
Well, we're certainly proud of you two. We really are. And, I know that you're both going to be very successful, whatever you decide to do.
It's sure great having you here in Provo.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for doing this.
You're
But
welcome.
just
Thanks for asking.
tell just a little bit. Tell us why you're here in Provo. I was
Tell
gonna.
You know, we
Everybody
really,
look at that snow out there. So we've got 8 inches of snow on the ground. Let me go give myself another sales talk.
you know, I always said we would never move to Provo. It's such an ugly little place. It really is. And we had no intention of moving up here. But last summer last spring, we were here for a conference. And we just happened to pass by that place over there on Fur, and it had an advertisement for 6 bedrooms. I said, wouldn't that be neat for the grandchildren? And we went in, and it was a wreck. But Ella said, well, let's go by and see President Taylor's house. It's for sale. So we walked through it, and we thought the garden was beautiful. And then we said, fine. And we went on home, and as on the way home, we said, you know, that is not a bad idea. The grandchildren are up there at school, and their parents will come to visit them. And we might see them more than we do, you know, in Sacramento. And
It's about halfway, yeah.
between Sacramento and Dallas, so and we're close to the Y. We'd enjoy the events there, and we're close to the temple. We could walk to the temple. We haven't walked there yet. And we talked to ourselves that way, and we said, our house is too big. We've been wanting to sell it. And so we went home, and I went on up to Susie's, and Lynn called the next day, and he said, I made an offer on that place in Utah. And the next day he called, he said, they took the offer. We've got 2 houses. We didn't even know what this place was like. We hadn't looked at it at all carefully.
I'll tell you what we did. We bought a backyard.
We remember the backyard
Yeah.
was beautiful.
But anyway, Maude came back and brought Billy, and they measured it and found out that we couldn't use our rugs, these Chinese rugs, because of that big fireplace that stuck out into both rooms. Couldn't use either rug. Couldn't use our dining room furniture because the fireplace took up so much room. So the first thing we did is took out the fireplace. The rugs fit in here beautifully now. And it's really open. The house, it's made it an attractive little house here.
It
I
really
think.
is.
Very attractive.
It really is.
A lot of
better
room
now that
here.
you fixed it up.
Yeah. And Maude's done a real good job decorating this house, I think. She's
Really
done a
nice.
good job.
Really pretty.
Yeah.
Well, and we put our house on the market, and the first person, we just put an ad in the paper, and the first person that came by bought it. So we felt like this is really the thing that we should do. It
Yeah.
seemed to everything work into place. And we have enjoyed it. We have a nice ward here, and people are friendly. And we've enjoyed
Yeah,
it.
we like it very much. We see every athletic event practically.
Volleyball,
Volleyball, girls
basketball.
basketball, boys tennis, tetherball.
We also go to all the concerts.
Go to the concerts
And
and the
theaters.
plays, and musicals.
So it's
Something
kind of
going
fun.
on nearly every night.
It's kind of fun.
And we've met some real good, I met some of my old friends that I went to school with at Gila College here. And it's worked out real good. I like it.
Tell what you're going to do for the winter.
Let me go out and take a look at that snow again. Wednesday, I didn't know, they didn't tell me about all this white stuff. They didn't tell me about shoveling the sidewalks in snow. So, in fact, I told my neighbor across the street, I said, why don't you tell me about shoveling this stuff? Where I bought this house. We're leaving here Wednesday, going south. We'll probably stop in Dallas for a day and then go on down to Houston, where we'll spend Christmas with Kathy. And we're going to spend about 2 weeks and then go to the West Coast where it's warm and spend 2 weeks out there with each of the families, and that'll put us about the 1st of March. We'll be back here, and we're hoping the snow will be melted, and Maude's going back to Texas in March to take care of George's family while they go to Hawaii.
And Kathy's baby, hopefully.
And Kathy's baby, that's right. So I'll be here in March by myself, so you guys invite me up to eat dinner once.
Sure, you bet. I think we owe you a few.
He'll see that he gets up there.
No, that's right. That's right.